Montgomery Clift lists the LGBT Hollywood stars. He had a covert relationship. Edward Montgomery Clift was born in Omaha, Nebraska, on October 17, 1920. Clift was raised in a wealthy but unstable family. Ethel Clift, his mother, was a strong-willed woman with aspirations to become an aristocracy. She raised her children to be well-educated and well-traveled, introducing young Monty to the arts, music, and languages from a young age. Despite being intellectually stimulating, his childhood was also characterized by emotional detachment and volatility, which would reverberate in the parts he played. As a teenager, Clift started performing on Broadway, where he immediately won praise from critics for his innate skill and raw passion. At the age of 15, he had his Broadway debut, and by his early 20s, he was sharing the stage with well-known performers like Lunt and Fontaine and Tula Bankhead. In contrast to many of his peers, Clift spent almost 10 years honing his talent on stage before transitioning to film. This gave his on-screen persona a theatrical nuance and depth that distinguished him from the conventional Hollywood leading men of the era. One of the first performers to introduce a method acting mentality to mainstream American cinema, he declined long-term studio contracts in order to preserve his artistic independence, a move that was virtually unheard of in the 1940s. In contrast to the austere, hypermasculine stereotypes that had previously dominated the genre, Clift's tender depiction as the adopted son of a domineering cattleman provided a startling contrast in his 1948 film debut opposite John Wayne in the western Red River. He received his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor that same year while starring in The Search. Clift's sympathetic portrayal struck a deep chord with post-war viewers, as the movie followed a soldier who aids a young child in his quest to find his mother following World War. The second Clift would provide a number of remarkable performances in highly regarded movies over the course of the following 10 years, such as Rainry County 1957, From Here to Eternity 1953, and A Place in the Sun 1951. The Decision at Nuremberg in 1961, and The Sudden Events of Late Summer 1959. His collaborations with filmmakers such as George Stevens, Fred Zinnemann, and Edward Dimitri showcased his adaptability and unique emotional openness, which had a significant impact on actors like Marlon Brando, James Dean, and Al Pacino in the future. Clift experienced significant personal hardships despite his career success. At a period when homosexuality was not only vilified but also considered a career killer in Hollywood, he was a closeted gay guy. Lifelong struggles with anxiety, despair, and substance misuse resulted from the emotional toll of concealing his actual personality and the obligation to uphold a meticulously controlled public image. After attending a dinner party held by Elizabeth Taylor, whom he had a close, lasting acquaintance with, Clift was in a near-fatal vehicle accident in 1956. His look was forever changed, and his internal conflict intensified after the collision left his face severely damaged and necessitated major plastic surgery. Film historian Patricia Bosworth referred to his latter career as the longest suicide in Hollywood history because of the raw, eerie aspect of his acting following the disaster. a heartbreaking yet moving allusion to the level of emotion he maintained while suffering in secret. Despite his unpredictable conduct and deteriorating health in his later years, Clift remained dedicated to his craft. He featured with fellow superstars Marilyn Monroe and Clark Gable, who both battled their own inner demons, in the 1961 film The Misfits, which was directed by John Huston and written by Arthur Miller. It was one of his most dramatic and subtle performances. Often regarded as one of his best roles, Clift's portrayal of a damaged cowboy seeking purpose reflected his own internal struggle. Despite being less well known, his final movie, The Defector 1966, which was finished just before he passed away, showed his unwavering dedication to acting. Montgomery Clift was alone in his New York City townhouse, a red brick home at 217 East 60 Honest Street, which was tucked away on Manhattan's wealthy Upper East Side, for most of the day on July 22, 1966. Although modest by Hollywood standards, the house was rich in personal history and brimming with books, letters, and memorabilia from the reclusive actor's lengthy and turbulent career. It had become a sort of secret sanctuary for him in his later years. Even while Clift was not completely alone that day, his actions indicated a growing distance from others around him. By this stage, Clift's life had been characterized by loneliness. He was in the house with Lorenzo James, his lifelong friend and private nurse, who had provided Clift with almost continuous care in his last years. However, the two guys hardly spoke to each other. It was not unusual for them to be silent. Actually, it was a reflection of Clift's increasing physical and emotional detachment, which had been there for a while. Once a bright star, renowned for his energy and charm, Clift has grown more and more solitary, possibly burdened by deteriorating health, the psychological effects of a horrific vehicle accident 10 years prior, and a convoluted battle with addiction and internal conflict. Sensing that it was late, and possibly trying to find a way to get back in touch, James proposed that Clift watch a replay of The Misfits, the 1961 movie in which he had co-starred with Marilyn Monroe and Clark Gable. As the clock ticked past midnight into the early hours of July 23rd, the film had bittersweet associations and was slated to be a late-night feature. It was the final movie that Monroe and Gable finished making before they passed away, in addition to being one of Clift's most well-known latter roles. However, Clift's reaction to the proposal was sudden and forceful. "Absolutely not," he yelled, obviously disinterested or possibly unwilling to revisit memories connected to the movie, which was made during a stressful period in his personal and professional life. The last words that Clift is known to have spoken were during the outburst. James chose not to speak to Clift again that evening after hearing the scathing rejection, and silently withdrawing to his own bedroom without pursuing the issue. As sunshine began to trickle into the peaceful home at around 6:30 a.m., James got up and went to see how Clift was doing as usual. He became concerned when he discovered the actor's bedroom door locked from the inside. The solitude behind his door was unnerving, and Clift hardly ever locked it. James rushed to the garden at the back of the townhouse, after failing in his attempt to pry the door open. He mounted a ladder there and went through a window into the bedroom on the second level in a last-ditch effort to get to Cliff. He found something unsettling. Cliff was laying still in bed, naked, both fists clasped at his sides, eyeglasses still resting on his face. The picture was powerful, serene, and tense, as if Cliff's body still carried the physical remnants of his life's hardships. James, who was probably shocked and in a hurry, called the New York City Medical Examiner's Office and Cliff's personal doctors right away via the bedroom phone. Even though an ambulance arrived quickly, it was obvious that nothing could be done. Soon after, Cliff's body was sent to the municipal morgue for an examination. The investigation showed that occlusive coronary artery disease, a condition in which the arteries become so occluded that the heart can no longer function normally, was the cause of death, resulting in a catastrophic heart attack. The results sparked public conjecture, even though they verified that Cliff had passed away naturally. The post-mortem revealed no evidence of suicide or foul play. However, as is often the case with sad Hollywood personalities, particularly those whose reputations are tainted by mystery and melancholy, whispers continued. Conversations concerning Cliff's declining health and personal issues resurfaced in the days that followed. Many people think that years of substance misuse, which exacerbated the physical trauma he experienced following his near-fatal car accident in 1956, accelerated his death. His face was broken in that accident, and in order to deal with the pain and disfigurement that followed, he turned to alcohol, sedatives, and pills. Cliff had also long suffered from chronic colitis and diarrhea, which made his health much more problematic and frequently caused him to be uncomfortable. An underactive thyroid, commonly known as hypothyroidism, which can cause symptoms including slurred speech, sadness, lethargy, and low blood pressure, was also discovered during the post-mortem. This illness might have contributed to the false public perception that Cliff was always intoxicated or under the influence of drugs by making him appear drunk even when he was sober. This information gave Cliff's story a melancholy undertone by raising the possibility that some of the harm to his reputation was caused by uncontrollable physical problems. St. James's Church on Madison Avenue in Manhattan hosted a short but poignant funeral for Montgomery Clift. Approximately 150 mourners, including some of the most prominent entertainment and Hollywood aristocracy, attended the brief 15-minute service. They included Nancy Walker, Frank Sinatra, and Lauren Beale, all of whom had collaborated with Cliff or considered themselves close friends. Cliff's own complicated and frequently minimalist nature was reflected in the service's simplicity. Following the service, his remains were interred at the Friends Quaker Cemetery, a peaceful, tree-shaded graveyard in the center of Prospect Park in Brooklyn that provided a sharp contrast to the commotion and media attention of his movie career. One of Cliff's closest confidants and steadfast friends, Elizabeth Taylor, sent flowers in her honor, even though she was in Rome at the time and couldn't attend in person. Rhodey McDowell, Judy Garland, May Oy, and Lou Wasserman were among the other people who donated floral arrangements, and they all acknowledged the significant influence Cliff had on both their personal and professional life in the film industry. Their actions said a great deal about how highly Clift was regarded in spite of, or maybe even because of, the anguish and fragility that had characterized so much of his life. Decades after his death, his bright, troubled life still captivates and inspires admirers. One of the most mysterious and gifted actors of Hollywood's heyday, Montgomery Clift, had a life filled with both great artistic accomplishment and intense emotional adversity. He fiercely guarded his inner life, especially his sexuality, beneath the brooding charm and fragile masculinity that made him a cinematic hero. Clift was a member of a covert network of gay and bisexual men in Hollywood, during a time when being outspoken about one's sexual orientation might ruin an actor's career. Several intimate friends and biographers have recalled that Clift confided in them about his connections with other guys in the film industry, including some well-known figures who too were compelled to live double lives, despite the fact that he never came out publicly during his lifetime. Clift had separate romantic relationships with numerous of his peers, according to a number of rumored tales, including those from acquaintances like Elizabeth Taylor and other Hollywood insiders. Heartthrob and fellow actor Farley Granger, who later came out as bisexual, is one of the most often cited individuals. It is said that during the late 1940s, while both Granger and Clift were being developed as leading men by the studio system, they had a brief but intense relationship, although neither party has ever formally acknowledged their connection during their lifetimes. Sources have characterized it as intense, but overshadowed by the need for confidentiality. Rock Hudson, another movie star who has always avoided inquiries about his sexual orientation, was one of those purportedly mentioned. Despite working in the same Hollywood circles, the two men hardly ever appeared together in public, possibly to allay suspicions. In the early 1950s, when they were both still in their prime, the two had a brief but intense affair, according to people who knew them well. According to one insider, their relationship was characterized by intense affection, but was also stressed by Hudson's growing reliance on public image control and studio manipulation. Marlon Brando is another name that comes up in hushed rumors of old Hollywood legend. In addition to having a similar acting philosophy based on method acting, which transformed the art form in mid-20th century cinema, the two performers had a strong affection for one another. Even so, Brando was notoriously evasive about his sexual orientation, admitting to having experienced homosexuality and making vague remarks in interviews. He and Clift are said to have had at least one amorous experience, although their relationship may have been brief and silent in public. It exemplified the intricate web of desire, competition, and mutual struggle that defined homosexual and bisexual men's interactions in a discriminatory industry. It is also claimed that Clift was sexually involved with John Ireland, another actor who is renowned for his tough on-screen persona. Ireland was a fascinating contrast to Clift's more reflective demeanor because of his professional background and reputation for intensity. Clift reportedly characterized their relationship as emotionally charged and tense, with the fear of discovery, particularly in light of Ireland's meticulously maintained public image, despite the paucity of evidence. Clift was also said to have had a close, potentially intimate relationship with Paul Robeson, an actor and singer. This association illustrates Clift's wider range of influence and the variety of people who might have influenced his sexual and emotional life, although being significantly more conjectural and less well documented than others. Being a politically vocal individual and one of the most well-known black artists of his era, Robeson was closely watched by the government and media, making any relationship, real or imagined, dangerous. Clift is a romantic. His life was lived in secret, with the majority of his connections occurring in private residences, at exclusive gatherings, or behind the shield of Hollywood's studio system, which regularly used gossip columnists and fixers to prevent negative press coverage. A series of partnerships characterized more by emotional depth and secrecy than by public awareness resulted from his frequent dating of men who shared his dread of exposure. People who knew him well, such as intimate confidants like Elizabeth Taylor, said that although his interactions were very important, they were always tinged with grief because of the constant need for caution. Montgomery Clift's courage resided not in outspoken statements, but more in his refusal to fully comply with the studio system's demands during a period when being classified as homosexual could spell the end of a career. He opted to live as genuinely as possible under the constraints of a highly oppressive era, rejecting studio-mandated marriages of convenience. His narrative is one of emotional sincerity and subdued resistance, a tribute to the unseen lives of several men who, like him, shaped Hollywood history in the background.